Welcome to Story Time with Chris James. I will now pick up right where I left off last week. After church, Paula had disappeared into the back room, only to emerge carrying 2-gallon jugs. She was laying in a supply of holy water. The Boguses had invited the Bellums over for lunch. Sarah and her mom came, and Sandra was drug along unwillingly. Wilma wanted to make a break for it, but she was still under the power of this strange woman who kept calling her Pam. She looked in the mirror and saw that weird girl from the office. The office she was going to leave forever as soon as she could get back there. Wilma kept reaching up to adjust her glasses, only to find there was still nothing there. Sarah wouldn't leave her alone. "What's up? You're acting so weird. More weird than normal. Are you still suffering from that weird age reversal you had last week?" Sarah knew all about things going on in Pam's life, as she had decided to write a biography based on all of the things her friend had said and done. Wilma was afraid to say anything. The last time she'd seen this tween, she'd turned her into a zombie. Pam walked casually up the stairs as if she owned the place. Well, close enough. At the top of the stairs, she ran into Sharma and Dan, who were just coming in from church. They attended services down the street at that old burned out church. "Hey, guys, I see you're back already. Any plans for the day?" Pam considered inviting them to lunch and then thought better of it. Dan looked at Sharma, who was looking back at him. "She can see us," Dan whispered. "Well, yeah, I can see you and hear you both. You should know that." Pam wondered if some kind of a weird joke was being attempted on her. "Is there something wrong?" Sharma tried to think how to handle this. Uh, Miss Miss Dinkins, you're working late today or early?" She slipped her hand into Dan's arm. Pam had a quick thought. "Oh, it's the orange sweater. They're just having fun with her. Maybe the sweater was from them." "Okay, you got me. I really like the sweater. Thanks." Sharma stepped behind Dan. Looking over his shoulder, she asked, "Are you feeling okay? Maybe you're working too hard. Maybe you're still suffering from being turned into a newt and a zombie." Pam felt something on her face. She reached up to find glasses. "I don't wear glasses." She pulled them off, only to find that she couldn't see anything. "Oh no, this getting old happens quicker than I thought." She put the offending frames back on. Dan looked long and hard at Wilma. Without taking his eyes off this strange young woman, he said to his wife, "I think this might be something to do with Belle." Sharma thought about it. "We should take her down to Belle's lair and see if she did something." Dan pulled the chain attached to the bell on Belle's door. It gave out an ominous sound. After a few minutes, Belle walked up behind them. "You rang?" She had on a black housecoat. Both Sharma and Dan jumped as if, well, something had scared them. Pam already knew Belle had a storage room built next door, which she'd then turned into a bedroom. She was about to say something to the witch, but Sharma beat her to it. Sharma spun around and asked, "Did you cast some kind of a spell on Pam, making her look like that creep horrible Wilma?" Belle just looked at Pam, who looked like, well, you should know what's going on by now. "Sharma wants to know if you maybe cast a spell on me, making me look like Wilma." She had forgotten Belle couldn't see or hear the ghosts. Belle hadn't had her coffee yet, so she didn't even try her signature cackle. Look, you, it's only because I like Pam a lot that I turned you back into a human. I could fix that right now, you know. Belle, this just might be Pamela. I think someone, not necessarily you, maybe some other witch, cast a spell on her. Dan tried to assert his authority. Pam had to pass this on as well. Dan and Sharma are asking if just maybe you know anything about why I look like Wilma Dinkins? Well, duh. You look like Wilma Dinkins because you are Wilma Dinkins. What, you thought you'd look like my best friend or something? Sharma got mad. Look, you witch, you did something to our friend and you'd better undo it or we'll haunt your lair for the rest of the year. Pam put in, they want you to change me back. Belle finally had had enough. It's too early for this. I need coffee. After checking to see if her pickup was in the parking lot, which it wasn't, Pam got busy making coffee. She put 4 cups on the counter and filled each. As Dan and then Sharma lifted their cups, Belle nearly screamed. Even having worked here for 3 months, she couldn't get over the fact that there were honest to God ghosts living, living? Well, hanging around just above where she slept. She turned in her seat so she couldn't see the coffee cups moving on their own. She addressed Pam. Let's just say someone who isn't me, cast a spell on you, making you look like that like that woman. Now, how do I know you're not trying to get me in trouble by turning you into someone who looks like Pam? Sharma tried to help by saying, Wilma can't see ghosts. Only Pam can. She thought a second. And of course, Susie, but she's no longer with us. Pam smiled at Belle until she realized she didn't hear that last comment. I can see ghosts. Wilma can't. Belle just stared. You say you see ghosts. How do I know you're not just acting like you see? Oh, never mind. I guess it must be more than likely that you are Pam. Well, that is, maybe. Dan hoped for a good conclusion. Can you change your back? He thought about it. Change both of them back to themselves. Belle had brought her spell book along just in case. She hadn't thought for a second until now that this horrible woman was, in fact, Pam. She brought the book in case she needed to use one of her protection spells that so far hadn't worked. She flipped it open to reversals. Okay, this might do the trick. She put her left hand in the air and said, Mutatio retro. She was hurled across the room, coming to rest under Pam's coffee table desk. Smoke was coming from her fingertips. Prince Wapo, who had been asleep in the middle of the table, leapt in the air and ran slowly from the room. He was a big cat. Dan was the first one at her side. Are you okay? He looked at Belle. He tried to help her to her feet. Oh, man. Oh, that feels so weird. Dan's hand was sticking out from her shoulder. Belle gave out a huge shudder. This whole ghost thing is just too weird. Pam sat at the bar, feeling dejected. I really don't want to go through life as someone else. I'm kind of attached to my old body. She had a thought. I'll bet it has something to do with this orange sweater. She began to pull it off. Dan turned around, facing away. Whoa, maybe you should give me a chance to leave first. He walked quickly out the door. Belle didn't want to be nice to the woman who had accosted her only last week, but it did look as if this might just possibly be Pam, so she pulled her housecoat off. Here, put this on. You don't want to catch pneumonia or something. Belle had a pair of black pajamas with orange spider webs and pink fuzzy slippers with rabbit faces on. She'd been asleep when Dan rung the bell. Now Pam looked like Wilma dressed up to look like a witch. The orange turtleneck was sitting on the floor at the far end of the bar. Belle was soaking her hand in a pan filled with water. Steam had stopped coming out a few minutes ago. That was some powerful magic. We must be dealing with someone who's been practicing for years, decades, centuries. Sharma was sitting next to Dan once more. Who would do such a thing? And why? Dan asked, have you upset anyone's plans for world domination lately? We've all been looking for the chupacabra for a week. There are several investigators looking for the Skinwalker. He wants to kill me, not turn me into someone else. Wilma looked around at all the people she didn't know. That big one, who kind of looked like Pam Bogus, seemed to be in charge. She had some kind of a weird power that Wilma couldn't escape from. Sarah was still trying to figure out what was wrong with her best friend. You've been awful quiet all day. What's up? Someone put a spell on you? Wilma'd had enough. Look, I'm not Pam. I don't know who any of you people are, but this whole situation is driving me nuts. I just want to go home, go to sleep, so I can wake up in my own body. Once she'd said it, it sounded very crazy. The entire room fell silent. Al finally said, Pam has been attacked at home and work by some evil forces. She just needs to find this thing and kill it. Then she'll be back to her usual self. Wilma reached up for the glasses that weren't there. This is just crazy. I have an idea. Everyone looked at Dan. Seeing as no one but us knows that she's in a different body, she can investigate whoever did this without them knowing it. But what about my family? If I'm here, is Wilma in my body, in my house, with my family? She had to wipe her eyes, which caused her glasses to fall off. Oh, my glasses! I can't see. Sharma quickly picked them up and put them back in place. She looked at Dan and then back at Pam. Well, we could run over to your house and check, see if things are going okay. No one moved. Dan finally asked, how do we get there? Pam's truck isn't here and the parking lot is empty. Belle said, take the company car. Oh, yes, that thing is way cool, Sharma added. After removing the offending sweater and not getting any response, Belle did her thing and checked it out. There was no magic in the sweater. Pam had just decided to put it back on so that Belle could have her house coat back. This time she gave Dan a heads up so he could exit the room before she got partially undressed. Pam had to drive since Belle still hadn't learned how. Dan could drive, but only ghost vehicles. In regular cars, his feet kept going through the firewall and into the engine compartment, and, well, Sharma kind of did the same. Manuel had removed the 8-track tape player and installed an MP3 player instead. Something called Pink Floyd was playing. Pam couldn't understand any of the words, but Dan seemed to love it. Belle didn't want to go, but wound up in the passenger seat mostly by accident. As they drove, well, as Pam drove and everybody else rode along, they came up with a plan. Pull up out front and me and Dan will slip inside. Nobody will know we're there, so we can just look around and see if Wilma is causing a stir. Sharma hoped her plan would work. Pam parked just down the street from her house, in front of Sarah's home. Her pickup was parked right where she'd left it yesterday. Dan and Sharma jumped out and began walking towards her home. I wish I could just go in and jump in bed and wake up in the morning as myself. Belle wished that she had stayed in bed today. At the front door, Dan was about to knock when Sharma grabbed his hand. Shh, we don't want to announce ourselves. Dan looked both directions to be sure that nobody was watching. He had been a ghost for several decades now, but old habits died hard. The two ghosts closed their eyes and walked through the door. Once inside, they could hear the conversation from the dining room. Look, I'm not Pam. I don't know who any of you people are, but this whole situation is driving me nuts. I just want to go home, go to sleep so I can wake up in my own body. Sharma looked at Dan, who only shrugged. They walked to the edge of the wall and looked into the next room. Wilma felt more eyes on her, so she looked towards the front door. So just who the heck is that? Everyone looked in the direction Wilma was looking. Who's who, dear? Paula asked. Those two strangers that just walked in. Wilma pointed her finger at Dan and Sharma. I think you should run upstairs and have a nice long nap. You'll feel much better later on. Paula not so much suggested as ordered her youngest, etc., to go to her room. Sandy was torn between thinking this was the best comedy she'd seen all month and horrified as she went to school with this crazy person. Mrs. Bellum was torn between staying and trying to help and getting her daughters as far from Pam as she could. Her mother instincts won. It was nice of you to have us over. Perhaps we can do this again. She didn't say when Pam is less crazy, but the look on her face yelled it. Sarah was busy scribbling in her notebook all of the things that Pam had said and done. She was getting a lot of material for her book on paranormal activity around her mentor. Wilma had a sudden urge to go upstairs. She tried to fight it, but found her feet walking in that direction. This was taking her right to where the two intruders stood. Sharma watched as Pam came walking right to her. She was looking at her and Dan as if not sure who they were. She can see us, she whispered to Dan. Dan had a thought. We only began to believe that other woman because she could see us. Wilma came to a halt right in front of the two strangers. She looked back at the people around the table and then back at the two by the stairs. You two aren't ghosts, are you? There's no such. She stuck out one hand right into Sharma's shoulder. Ghosts! Wilma passed out. Dan and Sharma were walking back to the company car. They just fell in behind the Bellums, who had just left the bogus house. Dan asked, do we tell Pam Wilma is making a complete mess of her home? Yes, no, maybe. Sharma had no idea how to handle this situation. Pam saw Sarah walking towards her, and without thinking, she rolled the window down on Belle's side of the vehicle and then waved at Sarah. Sarah saw the company car was parked in front of her house. That weird woman who kept getting turned into different things was looking at her, smiling and waving. To make matters worse, Belle was sitting next to her trying to duck down behind the dashboard. Sandy spotted that weirdo who dressed like a witch sitting in a hearse right in front of their home. That woman sure had a thing for black outfits. The woman driving was dressed all in orange. "I hope you didn't invite anyone to our house," she whispered to her mom. Mrs. Bellum began to worry that whatever was afflicting Pam was now causing her to see things as well. "Girls, let's get inside. It's getting late." Sarah looked at her watch. "It's only 2:30. Inside now." Miss Bellum got herself in between the car and her girls. She ushered them in the door and slammed it, locked it, and then peeked out the window. Sharma and Dan got in the back seat. Dan was more than happy to let his wife break the news. Pam looked at the two ghosts. "Is everything okay? Is she making a mess of my home?" "It's quiet right now," Sharma said. It took a lot of convincing to get Pam to not go into her home, but to drive back to the office instead. Once there, the two ghosts invited her upstairs so she could sit and relax. Belle was also invited, but she'd had enough fun for one lifetime. She slipped downstairs to get some use out of her new storage room bedroom. Pam realized she hadn't had breakfast or lunch, and it was getting close to dinner time. Sharma whipped up a big old batch of curry. "Now, what do I do? I thought becoming an adult things would be easier." Pam felt more like a little kid than ever. Dan gave it a try. "What you might want to do is track down this Skinwalker and see if maybe he had something to do with switching you two. Since you no longer look like yourself, maybe you can spring a trap on him." Pam thought this just might work. How do I go about finding him?" She thought about what Hortense had said. The Skinwalker was where the Civil War ghosts hang out, but the lieutenant said he hadn't seen any kind of an Indian witch. Sharma said, "Maybe she meant the old cemetery where they were buried." Pam had an aha moment. "I thought she meant the nightclub, but the cemetery makes more sense." Pam drove the company car along the little used road. They had decided it would be best to try their plan right away, in case A. things went bad, or B. they had to actually kill this thing, which Pam really didn't want to think about, or C. there was no C. At the end of the road, they came to the old cemetery. The same place Pam had fallen into a grave occupied by some dead guy, and then found out that she could speak and see ghosts. And she solved her first case. Dan had brought an M16. Pam had no idea where he'd gotten it. As he was getting into the back of the hearse, he didn't have it with him. Just one of those things. Sharma had a huge sword. She had dug it out of one of the many suitcases that she had. The sword was a lot longer than any of her luggage. Sharma had suggested that Pam get some kind of a weapon. She had a hunting knife tucked into her belt under her sweater. "Okay, now what do we have to do in order to get this Indian witch to show up?" Dan was about to look for a good place to hide and watch, but then, seeing as he was a ghost, he just stood next to the hearse. He was quite a bit worried that his bullets would have no effect on anyone living, especially a skinwalker. Pam and Sharma pulled a couple of folding chairs from the back of the vehicle and set them up. They sat down and tried to get comfortable. Sharma pulled a thermos from her bag and poured each of them a cup of hot tea. Pam wanted coffee. She needed coffee. Sharma had said that tea was better at calming them down. When this hadn't worked, she said that tea had more caffeine than coffee. Pam wanted to know how something with more caffeine could calm them down. As she took a sip, her eyes fogged up. What in the world? She went to rub her eyes only to knock her glasses off. "Oh man, my glasses!" Sharma quickly lifted the eyewear from the ground. As long as I don't think about being a ghost, I can do most of the things I did back when I was alive. Pam started their discussion. Do you think this Indian witch will show up? I wish you would call it something else. I keep thinking you're talking about a Dakini, which is a female practitioner of black magic. Sharma had her sword stuck in the ground at her feet. I know you're talking about Feather, not Dot, but still, let's just call it a skinwalker. Pam went on. I don't know what to say that might draw his attention to us. Or me. Would it help if you tried saying some disparaging things about him or it? Sharma began to wonder if any of her comments would be heard by the witch. Say something bad about his mother. What I've read, they say that the Navajo won't talk or even think about a skinwalker, saying that this might bring its attention to them. He sounds like a complete bozo. Pam didn't feel right saying bad things about someone, even if they were trying to kill her. Well, I say this nasty skinwalker thing isn't nearly as powerful as it thinks it is. Pam dug deep down into her reserve of upset feelings. The skinwalker's mother is a. Sharma saw movement in the trees in front of her. What is that? Pam looked and saw a goat emerge from the trees. Not a nice looking goat like the yard maintenance animal at the office. This is more like something from a sci fi movie involving man eating zombie goats. A very scary sci fi movie at that. I think he's here, she said just above a whisper. Dan saw the animal coming towards them. He took aim, ready to defend the two women. He said a silent prayer that his bullets would do their job. Yinaldalushi spotted his prey. The girl was going to pay for her insolence. He walked towards her, confident in his ability to dispatch her. Once he was within striking distance, he stopped and showed her his teeth. A snarl filled the air. Sharma felt she should protect her young friend. She stood and faced the animal. Look, you, we've had enough of you trying to hurt Pam. She brandished her sword in a threatening way. The rabid goat ignored her. Well, it didn't ignore her, it didn't see her. The three watched as the rabid goat suddenly transformed into a man. He was tall, with long black hair, dressed in a goatskin cloak, which he pulled from his shoulders. The fur looked like it was getting too much wear and tear, and it needed a good washing. He had a shoulder bag hanging from one side. No, it was not a purse, more like an ancient messenger's bag. He looked at Pam as if the others weren't there. Well, what do you expect? The Indian walked over to the chair that Sharma had been using. As he passed through her, he gave a visible shudder. He tried to act as if it were nothing and plopped down in the chair without asking. His eyes never left Pam. Before I kill you, I must ask, have we met? His eyes strayed to the teacup that was balanced on the arm of the chair. Pam wanted to get up and run, but she figured that he could outrun her, so, well, you've been trying to kill me all week. The Indian looked long and hard at her. Oh, really? I don't recognize you. I would know that horrible orange sweater anywhere. Pam had forgotten that she didn't look like herself. I have been looking for you for a week. You entered my home and tore up all of my clothes. She thought this was the right course of action. The skinwalker looked at Pam some more. He kind of scooted his chair back a little. Are you a Naldalushi too? He'd heard stories of a female witch who was more powerful than any three men put together. Pam almost said no, but Sharma was yelling, "Say yes!" Uh, what makes you think I might be a witch? Pam couldn't remember the right pronunciation for that word. She crossed her legs to keep them from shaking. Dan had lowered his rifle. He was watching something moving in the trees. He lifted a pair of binoculars that just appeared around his neck and looked closer. It was just a black thing on a black background. The skinwalker was becoming too nervous to sit here talking to this witch. He considered just killing her, but he was afraid she might not like it and kill him back, or worse. I've heard stories of a powerful witch. Are you her? Pam didn't know what to say. She spotted Sharma standing behind the skinwalker, holding a tire iron from the back of the company car. Sharma was waving her hand at Pam. She held up four fingers. Then she held up three, followed by two. Pam held out her hand and swung it as if shooing away a fly. As it passed in front of the skinwalker's face, Sharma struck. She hit the Indian witch as hard as she could. The skinwalker felt an invisible blow to his right ear. It knocked him from the chair. As he hit the ground, his eyes were filled with little yellow birdies. Once his vision cleared, he looked up at Pam from his place on the ground. You must be the most powerful witch in all of recorded time. He sat up, but he stayed on the ground. Pam flipped a mental coin, only to lose it since she kept her eyes on the witch. I'll make a deal with you. Turn me back into myself and put Wilma back in her body. Then you leave and you stop making life hard for people, and I won't turn you into a newt. It was the only thing she could think of to threaten him with. What are you talking about? I didn't turn you into anything. The witch thought a second. Are you sure you're a Naldalushi? Sharma thumped him in the other ear. Okay, stop hitting my ears. Dan was still focused on the thing moving around in the woods. He couldn't see it too well, but he was able to follow it by the movement of the trees and the bushes. Sharma accidentally thought about how much fun being a ghost could be. This led her to losing hold of the tire iron. It fell to the ground right at the skinwalker's feet. The Indian witch picked up the tool and looked at it. He looked at Pam. It would appear you've lost your ability to weld magic weapons. He got to his feet and tossed the iron away. Look, I can still do things. Pam tried to jump up and over the back of the chair, but only managed to flip over backwards. Her glasses went flying. Yinaldalushi began to walk towards her, pulling a huge knife from his belt. Dan took careful aim and squeezed the trigger. Pam heard the sound of 30 rounds of 223 ammo coming from beside the company car. She closed her eyes, not wanting to see anybody getting shot, which, without her glasses, was a non-starter. The Indian witch swatted at what felt like mosquitoes buzzing around him. You'd think, being a powerful witch, I wouldn't have to put up with these bloodsuckers. He focused his attention on Pam. And now you die. Sharma grabbed her sword and swung. The blade passed right through the witch's neck. The witch's head refused to leave his body. Instead, he slapped his neck. I hate those bloodsuckers. After managing to get untangled from the chair and finding her glasses, mostly by accident, since she nearly crushed them, Pam managed to get her feet and run. She had done a lot of running over the last, what was it, 9 months? The running had all been done using her own body. Wilma had done very little running, as in none. Her idea of physical exercise was a short walk followed by a long nap. Dan ran forward and tried hitting the Indian witch with the butt of his rifle. This got Yineldelushi to swat at the side of his head. Pam was having a hard time catching her breath. She had to keep pushing her glasses back up to her nose. The orange sweater was way too warm for the weather. She thought maybe she could lose the witch by running into the trees. Yinaldalushi placed the goatskin cloak over his shoulders, and once more the witch was transformed into the monster goat. He took off chasing the woman, intent on impaling her on his horns. The witch began to gain on the woman in orange. As Pam was getting close to the trees, the witch was getting closer to her. She saw something huge and black come flying towards her. She was so startled, she stopped running. This thing was about 7 feet tall and built kind of like a kangaroo, but without any fur, only black leathery skin. It had two tiny wings that were flapping as fast as they go, making the creature kind of hover about a foot of the ground. There were some kind of spikes sticking up from his back. It came right at Pam. Pam closed her eyes, figuring it would be better to be surprised by death as it overcame her. The thing passed right by her, knocking her glasses off as it did, and slamming into the goat. Bad things took place that are not appropriate for the printed page. Sharma came running up and tried to help Pam to her feet, as she did help locate her missing eyewear. Dan was standing next to what looked like a dead goat. It sucked all of his blood out. He pushed the dead creature over with his foot. Not a drop anywhere. He pointed towards the city. It flew off in that direction. Pam looked at the dead witch, expecting him to turn back into a human, which he didn't. In the movies, when they shoot a werewolf, it always turns back into a person. The three stood there waiting. When nothing happened, Pam asked, "Should we take it, or him, back and bury him, or it, next to the other two?" Sharma had a thinking hard look on her face. "I've heard if you bury a dead Indian witch, Feather, not Dot, the ground will become cursed." Pam gave her an inquiring look. "I heard it on a podcast." Her and Dan had been visiting the library at night after it closed and using their computers. Dan pulled an entrenching tool from his belt that had just appeared there when he needed it. He dug a nice deep hole outside the actual cemetery fence. It was fit for a king, and not a very powerful or good king, maybe the king of a small island with only 3 subjects. No one wanted to touch the dead goat, so Dan pushed it with the toe of his boot. He managed to roll the dead goat out the gate and over to the hole. It fell in with a plop. He filled the dirt back in. Sharma had found some flowers growing here and there, and she laid them on the ground. "Do you know his name?" "No, if I had, we could have used it to overpower him." Pam wiped a tear from her cheek. "Should we say a prayer or something?" Dan pulled his Army issue Bible and word translation book from his pocket. He opened it to a random page and read. Pam looked down at her body. "I'm still not me. I was hoping once we defeated the witch, I'd be transformed back." Dan looked at her. "Must have been someone else cast this spell on you. Are you sure it wasn't Belle?" Pam wound up sleeping on the couch in Dan and Sharma's attic apartment. She had to try to use the bedroom. She had tried to use the bedroom used by the yard goat, but when he saw Pam in Wilma's body opening the door, he'd slammed it shut and locked it. Chapter 10. Still Missing. Monday came with a crash. Pam fell to the floor. Oh, shoot, I gotta get to school. She jumped out looking for the bathroom. Meanwhile, across town, Wilma was having none of this. I'm not going to school, and you can't make me. I graduated 2 years ago. You people are all crazy. She had barricaded the door using the dresser and the bed frame. Paula was about to at the end of her rope. She'd already begun taking the doorknob apart in order to get the locking mechanism when Al came to her rescue. Maybe we should just wait and see. All this being turned into a little kid and then back, only to be attacked by an Indian witch. Maybe she just needs some rest. But she thinks she's someone else. Maybe she needs help. Paula was afraid that insanity might be hereditary. Her sister, Ramona, was about to graduate from the state mental hospital. She really didn't much like the idea of having her kid going in as her sister was getting out. Who would we call? Al was trying to think of any doctors he knew that still made house calls and dealt with mental issues. How about Belle? Paula said. She's not a doctor. No, but she does make house calls. Paula had a sudden thought. What if Belle cast some kind of a spell on her? Why would she do that? You know how kids are today. They act like they're all going crazy. Maybe they had some kind of an argument, and this is the result. Al really didn't think that Belle had had anything to do with Pam acting so weird, but he knew that when Paula had a thought, no matter how bizarre it might be, it was time to not say anything. Sharma managed to convince Pam that she should not go to school. They sat in the living room in the attic and drank coffee, waiting for ideas to spring forth. Maybe somehow you can find out who changed you into her and get them to change you back somehow. Pam was glad her mom wasn't looking over her shoulder all the time. She must be looking over Wilma's shoulder instead. Pam was afraid to head downstairs, dreading seeing all of her friends and not being able to interact with them. Wilma was still the new guy, a girl, and not treated like family yet. When sitting on the couch was getting her nowhere, she threw caution to the wind and headed on down. Dolores was just coming up the stairs. She looked at Pam, who, well, looked like Wilma, stepping off the ladder from the attic. Are you looking for ghosts in the attic? Or just looking? She gave Pam a suspicious eye. Oh, I was looking to see what was making all the noise. Pam felt like the turtleneck was strangling her. Pam says there are ghosts up there and she should know. Isn't your office in the basement? More suspicious looks. Yes, it is. I'm in the just going to I'm on my way. Pam nearly ran for the stairs. Madame Dingus saw her as she made the second floor. Oh, you're that new girl, the one that keeps getting changed into things. She gave her a suspicious look as well. I hope you're not snooping. That's a good way to get turned into far worse than a newt. She smiled to show there were no hard feelings. Some of the folks who work here might not like it. On the first floor, Pam turned and headed for the kitchen exit. She ran into Carol. I was going to get the company car. I need to go look at something. Carol gave her a harder look. The company car is only to be used by those with permission. You'll have to check with either Pam or Eddie. Pam wound up at the coffee bar. Mr. Techno or Chavez, I need to use the company car. Have you checked with Pam first? He gave her a look. Oh, see, she's in class right now. I really need to go see about the goat sucker. Pam was glad that the staff were being responsible, loaning out company property. She was also getting a lot frazzled by their suspicions. Eddie pulled a spiral notebook from under the bar. I'll need to see your driver's license. Pam suddenly realized that Wilma never carried a purse. Where did she keep all the things that young women had with them at all times? She thought back to that first day when Wilma had filled out the I want to join form. She had pulled her license from the top of her right sock. Pam felt down her leg, and sure enough, there was her, or rather Wilma's, license. Eddie wrote down all the information. Fill the tank before you come back, and you have to clean the vehicle inside and out before you're through. He slipped the notebook back under the counter. Pam walked out to the storage building, slowly coming up with a plan. A major part of her plan was going to involve the yard goat. She just had to convince him to come along with her. The goat was busy munching on a pile of old newspapers. Pam walked over to where he stood. Hey there, would you be willing to come with me to try and catch a giant bug? The goat gave her a worried look. It's easy. All you have to do is stand there and wait for this thing to come, and I'll take care of it from there. Pam slowly reached out and tried to grab the goat. The goat made a screaming sound and ran for the office. Pam ran after it. The goat made it to the back door and was trying to turn the doorknob with his teeth. Pam was able to get her arms around the animal just as the back door swung open. Carol had heard the cry for help and came running. That woman in orange was trying to abduct the yard goat. Just what do you think you're doing? She gave Pam a threatening look. Prince Wapo was sitting in the window looking out. He saw Pam holding the goat and wondered why she looked like that other woman. This was filed under Not My Problem, and he went back to sleep. Pam had the goat halfway up off the ground, the back half. I needed the yard goat to help me find the chupacabras. She tried to smile. Oh, no, you don't. The whole idea of using him as bait is just mean. Carol started towards Pam, thinking this new woman should be run off quickly. Pam dropped the goat's back end and backed up. I promised to be careful and not get him killed. Carol made a goat sound, and the yard goat walked into the kitchen. The door slammed shut, and it sounded like the lock was turned. Pam walked back to the storage shed and got behind the wheel. Well, that went well. She fired up the car and drove out of the yard before any more of the staff came to see what she was doing. With the biggest part of her plan now missing, Pam drove around trying to find something to replace the goat. She wound up driving past the school, which was actually way out of her way. Her pickup wasn't parked in her usual spot. I guess Wilma isn't interested in going to school. This got her to wondering how many days had she missed so far. Pam pulled into Merkel's parking lot and went inside. She headed straight to the meat department and began looking at the selection. There was plenty of meat, just not what she was looking for. The man behind the counter had on what had been a white apron. Do you have any goat? It has to be really fresh, as in maybe still breathing. Pam hoped this didn't sound as bad to the butcher as it did to her. The butcher gave her a shocked look. We don't. extinguish the lives of our selections here. He looked around to be sure they weren't being listened to. You need to check with one of the farmers out on the outskirts of town. He wrote something on a piece of paper used to wrap fresh meat in. Try this guy. He should have a goat or two. Pam walked back out to the hearse. Who in the world wears a turtleneck sweater in such a hot weather? She wished she had one of her t-shirts instead. The address was out past the airport. Pam drove along a wooded lane until the trees vanished and were replaced by fields. The fence was right next to the ditch, which was right next to the road. After following the fence for about a mile, there was a gate. The sign over the gate said, Rolling Hills Farm. Pam looked back and forth, but couldn't see anything even close to being a hill, not even a high piece of ground. She drove in and parked next to a barn. As she opened the door, the smell rushed in and assaulted her. There's just something about a working farm. A guy wearing overalls and a straw hat was working on a huge hog trap. The trap was huge, not the hog that was going to use it. He looked at her. Can I help you? He looked at the car. Uh, are you here picking up or dropping off? Pam forged ahead. I was told that you might have a fresh goat here, as in still alive. You're not going to use it in some weird sacrifice or anything, are you? The farmer looked at the car and then he looked Pam up and down. You a member of the Orange All Over cult or something? Pam looked down at her ensemble. No, I don't belong to any cults. Is there such a thing as the Orange All Over cult? Not that I'm aware of, but you do have a lot of orange. The farmer looked at Pam. The goat? Yes, I have one goat left. He's in the pen. The farmer led Pam around to the side of the barn. The goat was missing one horn. It had one eye that looked off in a different direction. There was a bare spot on his side, and his tail was crooked. He'll cost you $150 cash. It was right about here that Pam realized that she, nor Wilma, had any money on her. Uh, look, sir, I really need this goat. I'm trying to capture the chupacabras. The farmer just laughed. You don't really believe in those stories. What the heck is that? He aimed one finger over Pam's shoulder. A huge black thing had just come from the trees and was flying, if that's what you can call it, towards them. It was the same creature that had attacked the Skinwalker just yesterday. Pam looked at the chupacabras and then back at the farmer. He was busy running for the house. The goat was looking back at the creature that was flying towards it. Pam looked back at the creature and then at the goat. Oh, jinkies! Not knowing what to do, Pam reached over the fence and grabbed the goat. She lifted it over the top and onto her shoulder. Now, carrying a 50-pound goat, Pam took off running. Wilma's body didn't last but a few dozen steps before her legs began to ache. Air was all around her, but refused to enter her lungs. Pam was now gasping for breath. The goat just sat there enjoying the ride. Pam ran into the barn, stepping in something slippery and sticky at the same time. She managed to stay on her feet. With her next step, hay was stuck to her shoe. The goat was draped over her shoulder. It began licking her ear. Pam wasn't a fan of having her ear licked. It was when her glasses fell off that things went bad. My glasses! She came skidding to a stop. Pam bent over and began feeling the floor. The chupacabras that had been right behind her went flying over her shoulder and crashed into a stall. Pam found the missing eyewear and got them back on her face. Straw was sticking out in several directions. Seeing the goat sucker in front of her, Pam spun and ran back the way that she had come. The chupacabras got back to its feet. It shook its head back and forth as if trying to realign its brain. Once finished, it gave chase once more, intent on getting Pam's goat. Okay, it wasn't Pam's goat. She hadn't paid for it yet, and probably never would since she had no money with her. Pam made it to the front door and was about to try for the company car when the monster came up behind her. Its tiny wings were making a buzzing sound, kind of like a bee, a very big bee. Pam had just enough time to glance over her shoulder before being slammed to the ground. The goat managed to get onto her back as her front was pressed into the ground. It wasn't really the ground. It was the stuff that sat on top of the ground, waiting for the farmer to come and scoop it up and throw it in a pile. My glasses! Not again! Pam had to feel around the ground that wasn't really ground, finally getting her glasses back on. She had something on her fingers that also was on her eyewear, as well as all down the front of her outfit. The chupacabras was on her back, looking to make a quick, tasty meal out of the goat. Pam twisted her body, managing to get turned around, as she was now looking up at the bloodsucker. A long, thin mandible, like a mosquito, came out of its mouth and was aimed directly at the goat. The goat just looked up at the monster, more curious than scared. The long, thin, pointy thing was plunged forward towards the goat's chest. Pam did the only thing she could think of. Months ago, she would have passed out. That was the old Pam. The chupacabras had the misfortune of encountering the new and improved Pam. Pam grabbed the mandible and twisted. The mandible went to the right. Since the head was attached to the mouthpiece, it was forced to follow. The creature's eyes were so wide it looked like its eyeballs were going to fall out. Pam followed the twist with a kick. The monster was huge, but it didn't weigh very much. It went flying away back into the barn. Pam took a second to look into the barn. She jumped to her feet and charged the monster. The goat stood in the door watching, wagging his tail to show Pam, although he didn't know her name, that he was enjoying this activity. Pam grabbed the mandible once more and used it like a lever. She would twist it to the right, and the monster would move backwards and to the left. She lined the monster's backside up and shoved. The chupacabras went backwards right into the huge trap. The door did what it was designed to do. It closed with a loud clang. The farmer came huffing and puffing back from his house, shotgun in tow. Where is that a thing? He had to put his hands on his knees and try to catch his breath. It's inside your barn. Pam thought about it a bit. I won't be needing your goat after all. She placed it back in its pen. The goat went looking for food. What do we do? Can you kill it? The farmer was getting his color back. He popped the double-barrel shotgun open. Shoot, I forgot the shells. Pam thought about her options. She then thought the options were actually the farmer's. What do you want to do with it? The chupacabras is locked inside your cage. That's a chupacabras? I thought they looked like hairless coyotes. No, those are called blue dogs. They're still not sure what they really are. The farmer peeked in through the door. The chupacabras was sitting on the floor looking at them with its beady eyes. Is it worth any money? You might put it on display and charge folks to come have a look at it. I think I'll do that. He scratched his head. I guess I should get a bigger cage, huh? It's all yours. Just promise me that you won't feed the goat to it. Pam was driving out the gate when she noticed there was a bit of a smell following her. She rolled all the windows down to try airing the car out. Pam was almost to the office when she realized that she might not be welcome there, especially with all that farm stuff down the front and the back of her outfit. Carol might have told everyone that she was looking like Wilma had tried to kidnap the yard goat. Some of the staff were already a bit unhappy with her. Wilma, that is, not Pam. Pam pulled Wilma's driver's license out to see where the woman lived. The address was an apartment complex near the airport. I need a shower and maybe another shower and some clean clothes, something not orange. She headed to the apartment. It wasn't a high end place, but it wasn't anything like the place that Susie used to live in, along with her mother and all the other personalities she used to have. By comparison, this was a mansion. Pam parked the car in the visitor's spot and went looking for the number. It was on the second floor, and she walked up the stairs, stopping in front of the opening, and froze. There must be a key here somewhere. She began feeling all the places there would have been pockets had Wilma been wearing pants instead of a dress. She was on her third go around when she felt something on the belt. Pam didn't know there was a belt or anything attached to it since the sweater covered everything. The key had a tag on it that said apartment key. It worked, so Pam went in. The apartment needed a good cleaning. There were pizza boxes on the coffee tables. Seeing the table made Pam wish she had some. Coffee, that is. The trash can was filled with empty soda cans. Just out of curiosity, she opened the refrigerator. Good Lord, who eats this junk? She closed the door. The hallway had three doors off of it. Pam opened the first door. The room was all decorated in pink. The bed had a canopy over it, and the lamp shade was all lacy and ribbons. It looked like anyone, would live here other than Wilma. The second door was the bathroom. I will definitely be back here soon. Pam went to see if the last door was Wilma's room. It was, and it was all orange. This woman really likes orange. The walls were a very light shade of orange. The curtains were dark orange. The bed had a dark orange cover on it with light orange sheets and pillows. The carpet was brown. It must have come with the apartment. Pam carefully pulled the soiled sweater off. She turned it inside out to keep all the farm souvenirs from adding to the brown carpet. The dress was also in sad shape. One shoe was still covered in hay that was stuck on with farm animal stuff. Pam took her glasses off, but quickly put them back on. I so want my own body back. She grabbed an orange housecoat and headed to the shower, wondering what Wilma was doing with her body right now. Wilma was sitting on the couch looking at these two people who claimed to be her parents. She had given up trying to explain to them that her and Pam were two different people. Al was in his recliner. Did you bang your head on something? Paula was sitting at the dining room table. She had tried sitting next to her kid, but Pam would move to the other side of the room every time she tried. After the two had moved around each other for several minutes, they both finally found middle ground. Did you and Belle have some kind of an argument? Some kids' disagreement? Wilma was about to object when she remembered that first day. She did turn me into some kind of a lizard. And then some ankle biter came along and turned me into a zombie. It must have been one of them. Ankle biter? Oh, you mean Sarah. You shouldn't call her names. You can call her sister names, but not Sarah. Paula was still acting a bit odd. How could Sarah? Oh, never mind. It sounds like just maybe Belle had something to do with whatever's going on here. Al began to wonder what to do next. I guess we should drive over and see if Belle knows anything about this. They got into Al's pickup and headed to the bag office. Al parked by the new door, the one without a name right now, and they went in and down to see if Belle was in her lair, and if she could shed any light on the current situation involving their daughter. Mrs. Oberhair was at her desk, acting as if her boss wasn't walking by in front of her. It was only when he stuck his head in the door to say hi that she acknowledged his presence. Has Doug called in yet? No, but he accumulated a pile of messages. She held up a stack of phone messages. At Belle's door, Paula rung the bell. There was a note pinned to the door saying that Belle had stepped out to indulge in some much needed coffee intake. She's in the coffee shop. The three headed upstairs. As Wilma was passing Hildy's desk, Hildy got her attention. Is there any way you can do something about that loser in orange? She tried to kill the yard goat and now she's stolen the company car. Eddie is beside himself. Carol wants her blood, and everybody is sick and tired of all that orange. Wilma was shocked. She wanted to say something but couldn't speak. Her chin just quivered a lot. Paula pushed her towards the coffee shop. Pam was on her third shower, still worried that some farm stuff might still be lingering, when she heard the front door open, followed by a "I'm home. Did you find out who was trying to scare people away from whatever it was they were trying to protect?" The voice sounded familiar. Pam didn't know what to do, so she just winged it. No, but I caught a chupacabras. Ha ha. Who was it this time? Some old guy trying to run his relatives off? Pam felt around the edge of the shower door until she found her glasses. I have got to get my own body back. What was that? The other person was right outside the door. The guys want to get together tonight, have some pizza, and watch a scary movie or two. Pam wrapped the orange housecoat around herself and opened the door. There was a young woman standing in the hallway. She had red shoulder length hair, and there was a green scarf tied around her neck. She had a blue mini dress on. Well, at least it wasn't orange. Pam still wanted to get her old body back. I thought I would run by the office and finish up some paperwork. Oh, really? You've been working too much since you rented that office at that spooky old mansion. She walked to the first bedroom door and went in. Must be the roommate. Pam mumbled as she walked to Wilma's room. Pam closed the door and then went about trying to find some clean clothes. Does she have anything that's not orange? What was that? The other woman was standing in the door. Oh, I was just saying, gee, I sure like orange. Tell me about it. I don't think you've ever worn anything else since I've known you. Pam waited for this woman to leave, but she just stood there talking about things they should both know, but Pam didn't. Pam stepped into the closet so she'd have at least a bit of privacy. There were a dozen sweaters, all orange turtlenecks. There were also a dozen or so skirts, also orange. Neatly lined up on the floor were several Mary Janes, all dark orange. Well, at least I don't have to wear the poo shoes anymore. The other woman was now sitting on the edge of what Pam assumed was Wilma's bed. Wonder who's driving that old hearse in the parking lot. I'll bet it has something to do with grave robbers. Oh, that's the company car. I borrowed it to go looking for the Skinwalker and the chupacabras. The redhead just gave her a look that said, enough with the monsters already. As Pam was driving out the driveway, a van was pulling in. There were two guys and a huge dog all sitting in the front seat. They all waved, so Pam waved back. I've never seen a van with bench seats before. She headed for the office. Pam was now more stumped than ever. It wasn't the Skinwalker that turned me into Wilma, and I haven't made any enemies lately, have I? She was just going to have to ask the staff for help. Pam did her best to clean the car before parking it. She left the keys in it since that's where they belonged, and at first she was going to go see Belle, but the call of the coffee bar was stronger than usual. As Pam walked in, everybody turned to look at her. Eddie reached under the counter for the shake machine. I need coffee. Lots of coffee. Make it a double espresso with extra espresso, Pam announced. Eddie stared at her as he got started on the request. Carol was giving her daggers. You need to apologize to the yard goat. You scared the heck out of him. He was so shook up he actually ate some grass. I'm sorry. I'll tell him as soon as I see him. I was hoping he could help me track down the goat sucker. Pam flipped a mental coin. I need your help. I'm not Wilma. I'm Pam. There, it was out. Dolores held up her handheld mirror so Pam could see her own reflection. Nope, try again. Mikey Baba Ganoush just rolled his eyes. Belle was keeping her mouth shut, not wanting to be considered as crazy as Pam. Barbara was chuckling about Pam thinking she was Pam. Pam would never dress in orange. Her mother wouldn't allow it. I can prove it. I can prove I'm me. Uh, uh, when we were in Mirrorland and you were going to throw me through the mirror to save Dolores, you missed the mirror and slammed me into the wall. Then you ran at me screaming and I pushed you away, accidentally sending you through the mirror. Barbara had a lost look on her face. Pam could have told you about that, maybe sometime last week. She looked long and hard at Pam. You don't look anything like her. Pam tried another friend. Hortense, use your snow globe and see what you see. She needed to come up with a better way of saying that. Hortense didn't think it was even necessary. This woman was obviously delusional. Then she thought about all the crazy things they'd been through together. That is, if this actually was Pam, which it just couldn't be. I don't believe a word of what you're saying, but I'm willing to humor you. She pulled a snow globe from her oversized purse and set it on the bar. I see Pam. She's right here in the office. Holy cow, this can't be. As everyone sat there staring at Pam, looking like Wilma came walking in, looking like Pam. Al and Paula were right behind her. Paula was kind of pushing from behind. That's not her. She just got here. You're just catching things from the future. Eddie held up a cup and made a questioning face on the three newcomers. Wilma made a face. Yuck! Coffee tastes horrible. How about one of those orange shakes you make? Everybody looked from Pam to Wilma and back. Holy cow, they've been swapped. All eyes turned to Belle. Belle tried her invisibility spell, and when everyone was still looking at her, she said, What makes you think I had anything to do with this? Pam and Wilma were sitting side by side. Paula was sitting next to Pam, but thinking that she should be sitting next to her kid, even though she was. The staff were once more scouring every book they can find that might tell them how two people could be switched and how to unswitch them. Try Hannibal's book on bizarre magic, Eddie suggested. Hey, maybe we can use that card catalog thingy that Susie put together. Pam pointed to the cabinet with all the little drawers filled with cards on every book in the building. The staff was so used to just grabbing books and flipping pages, the idea of using the Dewey Decimal System was just too new. Barbara pulled out a drawer marked SKE to SWI. She flipped a few cards. It says Minky Shababa's Book of Whammies, followed by 777.776. Dolores went to find the book. It was huge. She had to get help to carry it back to the bar. Between Barbara and her, they managed to get the book up onto the countertop. As soon as Dolores opened it, the prince jumped up and plopped down on the page. Paula aimed one finger at him and said, "Get down. You should be trying to help get Paula and what's her name back in their own bodies." The prince moved to the far end of the bar. He waited until Paula wasn't looking and stuck his tongue out at her. It says, in order to reverse any kind of transmigration of bodies, you have to find out who did it and why. Eddie pulled out a notebook. Tell me the names of everyone you've had anything to do with in the last, let's start with the last week. Pam got a thinking hard look on Wilma's face. Let's see, I've seen all of you guys, but I'm fairly sure none of you would do this. There's Mrs. Oberhair, she works for Dad. Al just nodded. Charlemagne Boulderdash is Dr. Shrinkwell's secretary. Of course, there's Dr. Shrinkwell. Pam wondered if the doctor was actually doing any kind of business. I met Mrs. Rumpelsaurus, the mayor's secretary, and there was Robert Running Deer. He's the one that asked us to look for the Skinwalker. Pam thought really hard. There was the manager of the hotel. I never actually met the guy, but he did give me an evil look. Eddie wrote down evil look, followed by hotel manager. He looked at Pam and then at Barbara. Would you look under hotels, magic, and evil? Maybe there's some book on it. Barbara opened the drawer that was HOS to HOW written on it. After flipping several cards, she went looking for the offered book. It wasn't that big, just a few hundred pages, nothing compared to the last book that was still sitting on the bar. Barbara set the second book on top of the first, and the prince made a beeline for it, only to run afoul of Paula. He acted as if he was only there to sniff the corner and then walk away. Barbara flipped open several pages. She would read a bit and then jump ahead. Everyone who wasn't busy looking through their own books watched her every move. Dolores finally had enough. What does it say? Barbara put her finger down so she wouldn't lose her place. It's just a story about some guy from the 16th century. He wasn't so much evil, he was just a wizard. I guess back then that would qualify as being evil. She looked back at the page. His name was Hugh Draper, and he was an innkeeper. I guess that would be kind of like a hotel manager today. She looked some more. He was arrested for sorcery and thrown into the Tower of London. The court decided that he was guilty, and they wanted his head. Literally. Off with his head, they had said. While waiting to be killed, Draper carved a weird looking symbol in the wall of his cell. The next day, the guards went to get him, and Draper had vanished. There was no body ever found. She held the book up so that everybody could see. There's a picture of the symbol. She flipped the page, and this is what Hugh Draper looked like. Pam looked at the drawing. It kind of looks like the hotel manager. Just about anyone with a bald head and a beard would look like the drawing. Paula was on her feet. Let's go talk to this guy. He looks guilty to me. She was heading to the door with a look she gets when it's a bad idea to argue. Pam jumped to her feet, uh, knowing that look from past offenses. Let me say that again. Pam jumped to her feet, knowing that look from past offenses. Wilma just sat there sipping her orange shake. Al tapped her on the arm. You really should come along, unless you want to stay in our daughter's body the rest of your life. She grudgingly followed the bogus family out the door. Al pushed the button to unlock his pickup, and everybody got in. As Pam was getting in, she spotted Belle standing right behind her. You want to come along? Are you kidding me? A 16th century wizard is in town? This will be one of my biggest bragging rights ever. I can tell the other witches I met him. Pam slid over to the middle. We don't even know if this is connected to our little. Pam looked at Wilma, who was just staring ahead. Make that our huge problem. As Al drove out of the parking lot, Hortense was right behind him in her VW. Dolores was next to her, and Barbara was in the back seat. The company car was soon falling in behind the VW. Al drove as Pam gave him directions. They drove past the airport and pulled into the hotel. They walked in and stood by the counter. A short, bald man with a long beard came from the back room. When his eyes fell on Pam, he turned to run. Paula caught him with her voice. Just where do you think you're going? The front door swung open, and the other three came into the lobby. A few seconds later, Eddie, Mikey, Baba Ganoush, Carol, who was carrying Prince Wapo, came casually strolling in. The lobby was now quite full. The hotel manager looked at all these people who were all looking at him. Uh, can I help you? Pam was about to speak up, since she really wanted to stop wearing orange everything. Paula struck first. Is your name Hugh Draper? The manager was shocked. He hadn't heard that name in years. He tried to deny it, but his mouth was dry. Words refused to come out. Uh, er, you see, I don't, I don't know, what do you, Pam stepped in. We have found some rather unusual evidence. She pointed a finger in his, in, try that again. Pam stepped up. We have found some rather unusual evidence that points a finger in your direction. She didn't think this was lying, just stretching things a bit. We came here to give you a chance to tell your side of the story before taking things to the authorities. The manager managed to get his brain working at last. Oh, come on. Do I look like I'm 600 years old to you? To tell you the truth, yes. Carol held the prince up as if he were her proof. The prince seemed to nod his head in the affirmative. Wilma wanted to get back in her body as well. Pam was too short, too thin, and her folks were driving her nuts. Let's just turn this over to the authorities. I'm sure the INS will be interested in a British citizen who snuck into the country illegally. They'll probably send him to the Tower of London again. She turned to Pam. Do you suppose they'll chop off his head or tie him to a stake and set him on fire? The manager had to do something quick. No, wait, look, okay, my name is Hugh Draper. Yes, I did escape from the tower, but I was framed. I was just wanting to know more about magic and things. I wasn't a wizard. Belle set her witch's book on the counter. Can I get your autograph? She gave him a little girl's smile. Paula got up close and personal. You are going to switch my daughter back into her body, and also that other person into hers. The threat wasn't implied. Hugh looked at all these hostile looking people, well, except that green woman who was looking at him as if he were some kind of an idol. Okay, give me a second. He walked to the door. Eddie and Carol both stood right next to him. Hugh flipped the sign on the door that said he'd be back in 10 minutes. Come with me. He led them to the back room. The back room was way too small for all 12 of them, so Eddie, Carol, Barbara, Mikey, and especially Hortense stayed in the lobby and looked in through the door. Pam was curious. Why did you cast a spell on me in the first place? When I saw you talking to that Indian guy, I thought you were here looking for me. You had tracked me down somehow. I figured I should act first. I really don't like the idea of losing my head. He had Pam and Wilma stand in the middle of the room. The others all tried to give them space, not wanting to accidentally get switched in the process. Okay, look at each other and think about what you're about to do. He waved his hand in the air. Switch, he said in a loud voice and snapped his fingers. Pam looked at Wilma, who was standing in front of her. She looked down at her own body. Uh, she put one hand up to her face. The glasses were no longer there. I'm back in my own body. She felt like jumping up and down. Wilma let out a huge sigh. Thank God. I can get away from those weirdos. She slapped a hand over her mouth. Oh, Jinky. Paula was about to read the riot act to Hugh, but Al jumped in. Let this be a lesson. Don't go willy-nilly switching people's bodies around. Next time we won't be so forgiving. Eddie gave Hugh a look as he stepped out the door. Hortense cracked her knuckles as she eyeballed him. Carol held the prince up as if he was some kind of a threat. Belle kissed him on the cheek. As Al drove them back to the office, Paula looked over the seat at Wilma. Weirdos? She gave the young girl a look. Well, I'm sorry, but you have been looking over my shoulder for the past 2 days like I'm some kind of a little kid. You told me what to do, and you criticize how I dress. Wilma looked at the orange sweater that Pam was wearing. If you treat your kid like this, you're acting weird. Paula was about to put this woman in her place. Al squeezed her hand. He didn't say anything, but his eyes said a lot. Have I been acting weird lately? Pam, Al, Wilma, and Belle all said yes at the same time. Pam jumped in. It all started after you were transported to Geek Pam's home and you were exposed to her mom. The same thing happened to me and Belle. Anytime we meet ourselves from another dimension, we take on some of their qualities, good or bad. Al dropped Wilma off at her apartment. Look, guys, I really appreciate the use of the office, but I can't take any more of being turned into things or people. I think I'll work from home from now on. Pam did try to talk her out of it, but only enough to be polite. Al drove to the office and dropped Belle off. The witch hadn't said a word. She just sat there holding her book, stars in her eyes. It reminded Al of the night that Paula had met David Bowie. Once back home, they all got busy relaxing and not saying anything. The doorbell rang. Al went to see who it might be. There was a moving van parked in the front of the house. Two guys dressed in moving guy uniforms were standing on the walk. One was holding a clipboard. Is there a Queen Pamela here? He looked at Al. Al was flummoxed. Queen? No queen. There's a Pamela Bogus here. Paula came to see what was going on. Al said over his shoulder, Pam, there's a truck here for you, I think. Paula asked, Did you order anything lately? Pam walked over to see what her dad and now her mom were talking about. The guy with the clipboard asked to see her ID. He examined it against what was written on his paperwork. The guy pulled a scroll from his back pocket. Queen Pamela, bride of King I'm so hep, we bring you greetings. He lowered the scroll. Howdy. He raised the scroll once more. Being the legally wed bride of King I'm so hep, who passed away in a bizarre construction accident, you are heretofore bequeathed with his worldly possessions. He lowered the scroll and rolled it back up. Sign here. He held out the clipboard once more. How would you like to pay for the shipping and handling? Pam looked from her mother to her father. They both had shocked looks on their faces. Pam did the only thing she could think of. She signed and went to get her ATM card. After handing Pam several copies of the paperwork, the two guys began unloading huge wooden boxes from the back of the truck. Paula leaned in close to Pam's ear. Did he say you were married to some king? Uh, yes. Pam was hoping to avoid telling her mother about some of the weirder details of her trip out west. Paula was looking either mad or worried or maybe it was hurt. You got married and you didn't see fit to tell your own mother? Well, you see, the guy was dead. Pam thought her mom was going to pass out. It took a lot to explain the wedding as for the two moving guys to unload the truck. There were boxes piled up all along the driveway. When there was no more room, they piled more on the lawn. Paula was sitting on the couch with her head leaned back onto the backrest. She was staring at the ceiling. I missed my own daughter's wedding? It wasn't all that nice. The place was filled with dead people, and he wanted me mummified as well. Al was in his recliner. Well, that would explain the mummy costume you had on that night. Paula sat up. You said you guys had dressed up to go to a casino in Oklahoma. We did. It just wasn't the reason we were all dressed up. Pam got busy telling the parts of the story that she had skipped, thinking they would be too much for her folks to handle. Paula was putting all of her pockets, looking for cigarettes that she didn't have. Now was a good time to take up some very bad habits. The doorbell rang again. Al opened to find Sarah standing on the porch. You guys aren't moving, are you? She had a worried look on her face and a worried sound in her voice. Pam came to relieve her minion's worries. No, we're not moving. This is my inheritance from King Imsohep. Your husband sent you all of his stuff? Sarah looked at all the boxes. The two went inside so Pam wouldn't have to look at the pile of stuff. She had no idea what it might be, but she didn't want to know right now. How did the dead guy find out where you live, and how did he get all of his things to you, being dead twice? Sarah was hoping that this was the beginning of a new adventure. I don't know, and I don't know. Pam was beginning to think this adult thing wasn't as much fun as she was hoping. Sarah found the paperwork Pam had set on the table. It says here the law firm of Habeas and Corruptus was hired by Dr. Ibibad to forward all of His Royal Highness King Imsohep's personal possessions. The return address for Dr. Ibibad is the Oklahoma State Penitentiary, McAllister, Oklahoma. Sarah looked at the back of the form, which was blank. The doorbell rang again. Again. Al opened to find Belle standing on the porch. I'm glad to see you used the normal means of coming by. Pam and Sarah are in the living room. He led the witch in. Normal? There was nothing normal about it. I was in my lair, and some guy came and said I was needed for a special ceremony. He led me out to a limousine. It was an old and needed a lot of body work. He wouldn't say where we were going, but he dropped me off here. Belle looked around to see if she was missing something. Pam looked from Belle to Sarah. Do you realize that the three of us were all at my wedding? Captain Chapman was sitting at the nightclub talking about old times with a few of the boys when he felt an odd sensation come over him. He felt as if he was being pulled out the door and away from the old mansion. The captain tried to resist the pull, but it was just too strong. Since he couldn't not go, he focused on thinking when was the last time he had felt this way. It had been just a few months back. Back when the sound of thunder filled the room. The windows all grew dark as a storm was coming in. Al looked out the window. It was black outside, but he could see sunlight all around the edges. There's some kind of a weird cloud right over our house. The thunder shook all of the windows. Wind began to blow the dirt around the freshly planted backyard. A particularly strong gust hit the back doors, pushing them open. Pam looked out the door and saw a shadow forming. It was a very tall, dressed like an Egyptian pharaoh. His eyes were two red coals. Belle saw the shadow at the same time. "It looks like your husband has dropped by for a visit." She looked closer. "And he's brought a few friends." There were several dozen shadows emerging from the darkness around him. Sarah managed to look out the window by pushing her head under Pam's arm. She'd taken up refuge behind her. "I thought he was dead. Deader. More dead. Didn't we drop a giant statue of Anubis on him?" As King Imhotep walked through the door, he began to laugh. His head barely cleared the top of the door jamb. It did knock his nemes half off. A nemes were pieces of stripped headcloth worn by pharaohs in ancient Egypt. It wound up covering his eyes, and this led to him tripping over the armrest of the couch. Paula took this opportunity to pull her pistol and open fire. As she was squeezing off rounds, she was trying to come up with a proper articulation on how to tell the police that this thing was dangerous and she had to act. Al pulled the shotgun from under the same couch that King Imhotep was now draped across. He blasted the king several times. The glass in the back doors was no more. The lawn furniture on the patio was blown into the yard. Lots of holes could be seen. The sheetrock on either side of the door was peppered with buckshot and 9mm rounds. The bullets were just passing right through the mummy, who looked more like a living person. The mummy king slowly got back to his feet. There wasn't a mark on him. In fact, he looked better than ever. His skin was no longer dried out. His ribs couldn't be seen. For just a second, Pam thought he was kind of handsome. Paula looked at this king and wondered if he would make a good son-in-law. Just for a second. The sound of distant sirens growing closer could be heard. Belle was now standing behind Sarah to keep the young girl safe. Nothing could sneak up on her now. Just to be sure the tween felt safe, Belle buried her face in Sarah's hair. All that shaking was just Sarah's imagination. The mummy swung his hand up and outwards. He aimed one finger at each of Pam's parents. "You will come with me, or they will die." He was speaking to Pam, of course. "Bring your handmaids as well." Now he was referring to Belle and Sarah. Sergeant Hildenpfeffer came screeching to a stop out front of the suspected home where the domestic disturbance was taking place. She was out of her unit as it was still sliding to a halt. She could hear yelling and gunfire coming from inside. The pump riot shotgun was in her right hand. She worked the slide. The sergeant ran to the front door, took one quick breath, turned the knob, and shoved. The door flew open and she cleared the threshold in seconds. "Freeze! Hands in the—" She focused on the mummy. Yikes! He was tall, dark, and very good looking. He was followed, this was followed by her focusing on dozens of shadowy figures behind him. Pam heard the officer as she was yelling at King Imhotep, and the king didn't seem much impressed. "What do we have here? One of your private guards, perhaps?" His glowing eyes looked at the sergeant. "You will bring that one as well. I can use someone to keep an eye on my new bride." After having dealt with so many monsters and demons over the last few months, Pam had acquired a bit of knowledge. She knew the difference between monsters and ghosts. "You must be the ghost of a long dead mummy king. If you're a ghost, you have no power over any of us living folks." She hoped she was correct. Imhotep took a step closer. She could feel and smell his breath. For such a good looking dead guy, his breath could kill a hyena. Pam had to blink fast to keep her eyes from fogging up. She took one finger and poked him right in the chest. Her finger was shocked, as was she, when her finger encountered solid flesh. Sergeant Hildenpfeffer was trying to come up with some excuse to leave. This was obviously paranormal encounter. That weird kid was right in the middle of it. The sergeant's overdeveloped sense of duty held her in place. She did manage to key her mic and say, 217, 10100, which meant it was one of those situations. The sound of other police cars racing to the scene died out as everyone turned their lights and sirens off and went looking for safer things to do, like bank robberies or domestic disturbances. Al was still aiming his shotgun at the Mummy King that wasn't a ghost. He had reloaded his weapon, but could see it did no good. He was still aiming just in case something happened that would allow Double-Aught Buck to do their job. What that might be, he had no idea. Paula had dropped her pistol. She dropped it carefully, since it was her favorite weapon, but it was now sitting on the table. Without drawing attention to herself, she lifted one of the gallon jugs and slipped the lid off. With a scream of anger, frustration, and fear, the sound only a mother protecting her young could make, Paula turned on the mummy and squeezed the jug, sending its contents onto his head. I'm so hep looked at the woman and laughed. He wiped the water from his eyes. Now his full attention was focused on Pam's mother. I guess you want to join my bride in a life of eternal submission. He ran one finger along his neck in case she didn't understand. Captain Chapman was standing right behind the Mummy King. When Paula had sprayed him, the king, not the captain, with the jug of water, most of the water went over the mummy's head and landed on the captain. His hat went flying, along with a chunk of his skull. Back in January, Belle had used a giant candle holder to whack a bunch of zombies so that she and Sarah could try to rescue Pam. One of the zombies had been the captain, who now found himself once more following, well, at least behind, the Mummy King. Captain Chapman found the inside of his skull was now all wet. Talk about brainwashing. He looked at the Mummy King, who was looking at the woman that was looking an awful lot like Pam Bogus, only taller and a little bit older. He wondered how he had gotten here and what he should do. The decision didn't take him very long. The captain went to draw his sword, only to discover it was already in his hand. He used the sword the way that swords were meant to use. He swung it at the enemy. King Imsohep was looking at Paula when his vision was suddenly changed. His eyes looked in at the ceiling, followed by the wall behind him, and lastly he saw the floor rushing up at him. Pam watched as one of the zombies behind the king swung a sword and cut the king's head off. It fell to the floor with a thud. Paula saw the mummy looking at her with nasty intentions when one of his fellow followers chopped his head off. She was surprised and somewhat relieved as the rest of the king joined the top part on the floor. She saw someone dressed up like a Civil War captain had come to the rescue. Madam Bogus, I do hope I didn't do anything untoward to you and your lovely family. The captain looked at the assembled living people. Pam just smiled at him. No, but you did save my life again. I just hope I never find myself in a position to repay you. Belle looked from one to the other. Why am I seeing some guy dressed up like a Civil War guy? Pam looked from the captain to the witch. You can see him? Sarah didn't want to be left out. I'm psychic. Al just stood there with his shotgun aimed at the floor. Sergeant Hildenpfeffer had her eyes closed. I don't see anything. Just tell me when it's safe to leave. As Pam looked out the backyard, all of the other shadowy figures began to fade. Sarah, can you still see the captain? No? What happened? I thought I was becoming like you. She looked and sounded so disappointed. I guess with the third death, the Mummy King, all of his magic went with him. Pam looked at the captain, who looked like he wanted to be someplace else. Captain, if you want, you can head back to wherever you had been before. The captain bowed, sweeping the floor with his hat, but he held on to the top of his head with the other. He turned towards the back fence and vanished before he was halfway there. Pam looked for any remains of the Mummy King. What was in that jug? Well, I'd laid in a supply of holy water, thinking what with all of the weird things you deal with, it might come in handy. Paula put the lid back on the jug to save the few inches still inside. Sarah said, now we've killed your dead husband twice. Paula had invited the sergeant to stay for dinner. Sergeant Hildenpfeffer insisted she had to get out of there before somebody noticed that she was hanging around a paranormal scene. As she walked out to her cruiser, she had a fresh cup of coffee and a bag filled with snacks. Captain, Captain, Chapter 11, at long last. Pam didn't much want to go to school, but her mom insisted, since she had missed way too many days in the past 2 weeks. Paula also wanted to go along to keep an eye on things, but Pam convinced her that the chupacabras was in a cage, the Skinwalker was dead, and so was her more dead than ever husband. Pam kept checking her watch, wanting to get to the office and find out how King I'm So Hep was able to A, track her down, B, come back as a solid ghost, and C, how the heck anything in her life was going to change now that she was an adult. When at long last she was able to get to the office, she had to explain to just about everybody that she was indeed still Pam and not someone else. She had to tell Cassandra about all the weird things that had happened while she was away cleansing herself. Geez, next time I'll just stay closer to home. Cassandra worried something else might happen if she left town. Finally, Pam was able to get some answers. She looked up the Oklahoma Department of Corrections and gave them a call. Please press 1 to speak to. Pam did all the button pushing until she was able to talk to a human with answers. The voice on the phone sounded skeptical. You did say you were an investigator. Yes, sir. Pam Bogus, Paranormal Investigations Division. Ah, ever since we got Dr. Bad, things have been a bit weird around here. Pam didn't want to, but she asked. Weird as in? Well, all the prisoners keep away from him, saying that the man is possessed or something. They're all afraid of him. Has he done anything? Well, he did start his own church. Church? Some kind of Egyptian thing. The man on the phone continued. Yeah, he had a bunch of old artifacts sent in saying things about freedom of religion and such. Pam got busy explaining it had nothing to do with religion and everything to do with world conquest. The man on the phone said they weren't going to let Bad play with any more Egyptian artifacts. Dr. Bad was placed on double secret probation, awaiting trial. Hope you enjoyed the last installation of the Bag Company. This was book number 10. There is no book number 11 until I write it. Hopefully you enjoyed the stories. If you did, pass them on to other people. If you didn't enjoy them, why are you still listening? Until next time, this is Chris James for Storytime.